Hey guys, welcome to Crater Mania. I'm your host, the man they call Crater. And I'd like to welcome all of you back to round three now in Schwarzenegger versus Stallone in my 500 movies in 2025 series. So if you followed the last two rounds, you know that the score is now 2-2. So they're evenly matched, but I think we could see the tide turn on tonight's round. Um, so this is in this episode, this will be movies number 194 through 197 of the 500 movies in 2025. And so we're getting close. We're just a few away from hitting that 200 mark, 200 movies. And this has just been a hell of a journey so far, guys. Um, and after I finish up this whole Schwarzenegger versus Stallone week. This Sunday, I forgot to mention this in the past couple of episodes, but this Sunday is going to be Mother's Day. So I'm going to be doing a Mother's Day special. I'm going to be watching a few movies and talking about those on the Mother's Day special. And after I do that one, that will be my last stream here on the channel for 2 weeks. So I'm taking a break after this Sunday for a couple weeks. Just some things I need to get done outside of of work and the channel and everything. Um, but um, but I just want to thank everyone that has been with me on this ride. You know, so far, almost at 200 movies and and in counting. Um, so yeah, it's a huge thanks. Like this was a very scary thing for me in the beginning to start this channel, and just to kind of like have a layout of how I wanted to do things and just what I wanted to talk about, how I wanted to talk about it, and it still is kind of nerve wracking at times. I'm not gonna lie, like it's still kind of a thing where I get really nervous before I do each stream because I just feel like if there's times I kind of doubt myself and like, I'm not, you know, putting anything good out there that anybody cares about. But like I said in the beginning of all this, though, like I'm not doing this for that reason. I'm not doing this, for to get popular or whatever, or have like a million subscribers or whatever. I mean, that would be great. I would like to have a million subscribers. I'm not gonna lie. Um, I would like to have a lot of people watching and listen to me talk about these movies, but because I really really appreciate that. I like that people even give a shit to hear me talk about this kind of stuff. But like I said in the beginning, I'm doing this uh, first and foremost for me because this is just something that I've always wanted to do. That you know, just to kind of put my thoughts on these movies and stuff that I like out there. Most importantly for my family. So if anybody from my family, years from now wants to come back and watch this, that's the main reason why I'm doing this. Um, but if any other benefits, come from it, uh, I I'm more than welcoming of that. And just speaking of that, I mean, I did just hit 100 subscribers, so that's saying something. That there's 100 people out there that care to hear me talk about this stuff. Um, and I know that's to some people on YouTube, the 100 subscribers is nothing. There's some people out there that can get 100 subscribers in like 5 minutes. And I've been doing this, for 5 months now. But that means a lot to me, guys, more than anything, because when it comes down to it, I'm nobody special. I'm nobody that's going to be popular or anything. So, I'm aware of that. But I don't care about any of that. That's the whole point of me, you know, saying my piece on this and just giving that out there to everybody, um, of how I feel about that whole type of thing. But but that's just and I know that's really random just to kind of throw this in like the middle of this whole Schwarzenegger versus Stallone um, series that I'm doing. But it's just something that's been on my mind here lately, and just kind of wanted to just put that out there, and just cause sometimes you just need to do something just to be doing it. If it makes you feel better, and this thing really does, like, like, cause I love movies. I absolutely love movies. They're one of my favorite things in the world, and just to be able to come here and just use this as an outlet to talk about these things and put that out there for anybody that cares to listen, is really important to me. Um, but just to get off of that for a minute, just let's get back to what's really important to talk about here, and that's round three of Schwarzenegger versus Stallone. And I'm just going to jump right into it and talk about the first movie tonight, and this is an Arnold Schwarzenegger film from 1988. Not just a Arnold Schwarzenegger film, but it's a Danny DeVito film as well. And this is Twins. So I'm a massive fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I've seen him, terminate cyborgs, hunt down alien predators, even save the world, multiple times in films. Um, but if you really want to see, the man show range, and charm, and just a side that you might not expect from the guy who, brought us "I'll Be Back." You have to talk about Twins, and this movie isn't just a comedy classic. It's really a pivotal moment in Arnold's career, and frankly, just pure feel good fun. Um, and Twins is just, it's this comedy that was put out in 1988, and it was, it's built around, the most unlikely pairing imaginable. The premise is simple, yet ingenious. Like, there's two men. You're born from this kind of secret government experiment, um, designed to create the perfect human by just combining this donor sperm from these six different guys that were geniuses. And there are actually, fraternal twins who were shockingly separated at birth, uh, you know, under this like story that was created by these scientists that the failed twin Vincent had died. So the successful one, Julius, which is played by Arnold Schwarzenegger here, is raised on this kind of remote, South Pacific island, completely, isolated from the real world. And he's just this physical, like, marvel, like Greek god, of course, and he speaks like multiple languages. He's incredibly intelligent. Just he's just very pure on the inside and out, and almost kind of naive, almost like a newborn lamb or something. So his twin Vincent, which is played by Danny DeVito, is the complete opposite. So he's small, he's street smart, or maybe just street grimy. I don't know, but he's just kind of this fast talking, con artist, constantly in debt, and just living this life of kind of petty crime in Los Angeles. So the plot kicks off when Julius is informed by his guardian, uh, that he had a twin. That he had a twin brother who is still alive. And so, armed with nothing but a name and a location, Julius leaves this sheltered paradise and ventures into this just the chaotic unknown of America to find Vincent. And what follows is this classic like road trip comedy movie, mixed with it's kind of fish out of water comedy. Um, and the humor comes entirely from just the stark contrast between Julius's innocence and his politeness and just that incredible like physical presence that clashes with Vincent's cynical and dishonest and volatile nature. Just their journey involves tracking down their biological mother, and then getting entangled with Vincent's debts and just the associated bad guys and all that. um and and one of the hitman played in this is Marshall Bell from Nightmare on Elm Street Part Two. So I always thought that was funny as well. And but Vincent and Julius, they're just learning to become brothers on this throughout this journey in this film. And and along the way, they pick up Vincent's kind of skeptical girlfriend Linda, and her equally like skeptical sister Marnie, who initially think Julius is part of one of Vincent's elaborate scams. Um, hey, what's up, Green Slave? Are we watching? Well, I know I'm watching movies, but I'm not doing a watch along. I haven't done anything like that yet here on the channel. Um, but, I mean, it's something I'd be open to doing a watch along, but basically, no, I'm watching these movies and then I'm just kinda reviewing them here on the channel and just, so and it's a trip so far, man, like, so 500 movies is what I've got planned. I'm almost at 200 movies, but, yeah, like, I'm definitely watching movies. There's no doubt about that. Um, so, yeah, just welcome to I see that you're new to it, so appreciate you being here. But tonight, I'm talking about some Arnold Schwarzenegger films, Sylvester Stallone films. Right now, I'm on Twins. So back to what I was saying, like I said, they pick up Vincent's girlfriend and her sister Marnie, and like they think that Julius is part of one of Vincent's scams or whatever. So the film is filled with all these kind of genuinely funny moments, and Julius he he has these like literal interpretations of these common sayings, and his amazement, at these kind of mundane things like, cars and traffic and Vincent's constant attempts to just exploit, Julius's strength and his innocence. Um, and just their evolving relationship as they navigate, the world together. It's a story about, like finding family and discovering who you are outside of your your upbringing, and just that kind of enduring bond, between siblings. No matter how genetically improbable their existence or how different they may seem. Um, and the director of Twins is the legendary Ivan Reitman. And, Reitman was just an absolute master of comedy, known for helming some of the most iconic and successful comedic films of, the 1980s into the 1990s, the late 20th century, I guess. So he's perhaps best known, I think, for putting out Ghostbusters and Stripes, two of my favorite Bill Murray movies of all time. Um, and Reitman had this kind of knack for directing films with this broad appeal. Often kind of featuring these ensemble casts, physical comedy, and just a strong emphasis on these like character dynamics. He excelled at kind of taking slightly absurd premises and just grounding them with heart and this relatable humor. Um, and his style often involved kind of a blend of like witty dialogue and a lot of memorable comedic set pieces. Um, and for Twins, this movie, his ability to kind of handle that contrasting comedic style, like Arnold's deadpan, um, and being so naive versus kind of Danny DeVito's manic energy throughout the film. And he seemed to find that genuine human connection, beneath that kind of absurdity, which was crucial to this film's success, I believe. He was I think the perfect director to kind of take this wild idea and turn it into something hilarious and at times surprisingly touching. Um, but the legacy here and the impact of twins is very significant, especially with that whole context, of Arnold Schwarzenegger's career and just, Hollywood filmmaking in general. So this was a game changer, like I said, for Arnold's career. This is arguably, I think, the biggest impact with this film from a fan's perspective because before Twins, Arnold was the action star. Films like The Terminator and Commando, Predator, The Running Man, Red Heat. Even though Red Heat had some comedy to it, so that was kind of Arnold, leaning into the comedy genre with Red Heat. But all those other films, those action films that he was a part of, is really what defined him. And just the idea of him starring when this came out, I'm sure like people were like, "What, Arnold Schwarzenegger in a comedy?" You know, but it was just, I think it was genius to whoever talked him into doing this because it really just developed Arnold's, career, and it really developed him more as like with his appeal to people and why he's become so popular and just a legend, throughout the years. It seemed like a massive risk probably at the time, but I think that Twins proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Arnold had that incredible comedic timing, which we already knew of. Like we would see, like he kind of had like that deadpan, like kind of almost like a dark humor in a lot of his action films. So it definitely works here, and just that charm that he has and that kind of that acting range beyond just delivering those one-liners, while like kicking somebody's ass. Even though that's not a bad thing, I always like seeing Arnold kick some ass. But he wasn't just playing himself in this funny situation though. He genuinely, acted as this kind of naive, pure, like just the Julius character. I mean this performance really, I think, surprised a lot of people and a lot of audiences and critics alike, and just you know completely opened up that career path for him. And just, that is would lead Arnold, just the success from this film would lead Arnold to pursuing other comedic roles, like Kindergarten Cop, which is one we're also going to be talking about tonight. And that one was also directed by Ivan Reitman. And then he also did Junior, and then like later on down the road, Jingle All the Way, and all kinds of different films. And it just really showed these studios and audiences that, Arnold could headline comedies just as effectively as he could headline action films. And that just definitely extended, his career options significantly. Um, and Twins, this movie remains, I think, um, a very beloved, rewatchable film. I have watched this many, many times since I was a kid, and my wife has probably watched it even more than I have because when it comes to Arnold Schwarzenegger, my wife likes his comedies more than she likes his action films, and that's completely cool. Like I'm the opposite with that, but as long as there's Arnold's making a fan somehow, that's all that matters. Um, and just the humor in this film, is timeless. I think because it really relies on character and the situation rather than kind of these kind of specific references. Um, like there's a part I think it's funny because it's like a jab at that whole rivalry between him and Stallone. So when there's a part in the beginning when Julius, Arnold's character, arrives in Los Angeles, and there's parts where kind of him and Vincent almost run into each other. They're in the same area, in the vicinity of one another. They're even at times right next to one another, but they don't realize who each other is. Uh, and there's one shot in particular where they're standing right next to each other on the street in front of the legendary Chinese theater there in Los Angeles, and on the marquee is Willow, which is I just covered on my Sword and Sorcery series a few weeks ago, and that's my favorite sword and sorcery film of all time. I love Willow. And then immediately following that, like it cuts to Arnold walking past this like building or whatever, and on the wall is this huge like poster of Rambo. And so like Arnold's looking at it and he's looking at the muscles on Rambo and everything, and he like just feels of his own muscle, that seeing that his arm is bigger than Stallone's, and he just like goes and like walks away. So I always thought that was really funny because it's like a jab at Stallone, and that whole rivalry that they had with one another, which really sparked this whole idea that I had for the channel. So but overall, Twins is just it's a really feel good movie with a clear, simple story and just a very genuinely endearing core. I think the chemistry between Arnold and Dan DeVito is so unique and strong that it continues to entertain audiences decades later. Um, it's a go to comfort movie, I think, for a lot of people. Um, but I guess in conclusion, Twins wasn't just this funny movie, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was a strategic like move, I think that really redefined his career and just showcased his kind of unexpected talents and just had this lasting impact on both how he was perceived and how deals were made in Hollywood. And I think that's a testament to taking, to risks, that how actors take, excuse me, a lot of risk out there, and and just prove that even the most, imposing action hero, can be funny and can melt hearts, and just like I said, just make you laugh till you cry. It's a brilliant film, and as an Arnold fan, I absolutely love it. Um, and I just wanted to mention one other thing before I move on. There's a scene. It's like probably one of the fun to me, one of the funniest scenes in the entire movie, and it's when they get to the hotel and Julius and Vincent's girlfriend's sister Marnie, they share a room together, and they both like end up sleeping on the floor. But I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot of sleeping going on, if you know what I'm saying. But so it kind of cuts, it doesn't show the sex scene between Marnie and Julius, but like it shows after they finished, and it like so the camera is like zoomed in on Marnie, and she's like smoking a cigarette, and the camera pans over, and you just see Arnold just laying there like because it was like it's like the first time he'd ever had sex, so that was his like initial reaction, and it's just I don't know, it's just so funny, like seeing Arnold in that, like especially I'm sure it's even funnier back in 1988 because just seeing how people react to that then was much different than probably it is now, because that was just so different, from what he was doing at the time with the action films and all that. So yeah, I absolutely love this movie, and I feel like for as much as I do love it, it's going to play a big part in how the score turns out tonight after this round. Um, moving on to the next film. So now it's Stallone's turn, and this is a movie that I really liked this movie a lot when I was a kid, and this was probably the first time I had watched this movie probably in years, probably over 20 years maybe since I've watched this movie. And this is Stop or My Mom Will Shoot from 1992. Um, Now, this movie is, another one of those comedy buddy cop movies. Um, with the twist being that one half of the buddy duo is the cop's very embarrassing, overbearing mother. And Sylvester Stallone, he plays this kind of tough as nails, LAPD cop, Joe Bumowski, I think is his name. Um, but Joe is, a dedicated, no nonsense detective, the kind you'd expect Stallone to play, right? Um, so his life is kind of flipped upside down, when his sweet, meddling, and utterly chaotic mother, Tootie, I think is her name, Bumowski, who's played by the legendary Estelle Getty, who is iconically known as Sophia from The Golden Girls, which is one of my wife's favorite shows of all time. So she decides to visit Joe in Los Angeles, and the central plot kind of kicks off when Tootie, the mom here, wanting to buy Joe a gift to replace his old pistol. So she mistakenly purchases a rather illegal and powerful Mac 10 submachine gun from this kind of seemingly innocent flea market vendor out of the back of a van. So this purchase isn't just a simple mistake. It turns out that the gun was evidence from a recent crime, and its sale gets Joe and his mom tangled up with these dangerous arms dealers. Um, so the humor comes from this constant clash, between Joe's, tough guy police world and his mom's kind of domestic, well intentioned, incredibly intrusive, motherly antics. So his mom inserts herself, into every aspect of Joe's life. Cleaning his apartment, critiquing his diet, questioning his career choices, and one of the most hilarious things out of it all, she tags along with him on his police work. And so she's like offering all kinds of muddly advice to these like suspects, and she's annoying Joe's captain, and embarrasses him in front of his colleagues, including his love interest here, which is played by Joe Beth Williams, and just often kind of inadvertently stumbles upon crucial clues through kind of this sheer force of nosiness from her. Um, so Stallone, as Joe here is the classic, like tough guy character, and just his reactions to his mom's antics are priceless. I think he's constantly wrestling with his love for his mother versus his like kind of his desperation for personal and professional space. So Estelle Getty as his mom is really kind of like a force of nature. I mean, she's sweet, she's seemingly frail, but she's armed with this sharp wit, boundless energy, much like her character on The Golden Girls, and just this total lack of awareness, for boundaries or personal space when it comes to Joe. Um, so the dynamic, between that kind of gruff, stoic cop that and Joe, and his just his unstoppable meddling mom, is just the film's entire engine here. It's this comedic partnership that you wouldn't expect, but they genuinely sell the mother son bond. Although through this kind of highly exaggerated slapstick type style. Um, but the film follows this investigation as Joe's mom's accidental involvement leads them to deeper into this kind of criminal underworld. There's these car chases and shootouts. With his mom, often kind of present in these very hilarious, inappropriate situations, and Joe just trying to keep his mom out of harm's way, while also solving the case that she accidentally got him involved in. Um, it's a very light-hearted film that kind of leans heavily on a lot of comedic premise, and the the star power of the two leads here. Um, but the director here of Stop or My Mom Will Shoot is Roger Spottiswoode. I think it's how you pronounce his name. Um, so he's had kind of a very diverse career, often working within like the action and thriller genres, but with kind of a knack for projects involving like these unique character dynamics or concepts. He so he may be best known for doing Turner and Hooch. Um, Came out in 1999, with Tom Hanks and um, this dog. So it was like that. His partner was a dog. So and Turner and Hooch, I love Turner and Hooch, and that's it's got a very sad ending to it as well. But yeah, it's just that's one that I definitely grew up as well. Watching growing up, it's just a really well known and popular movie. When I was a kid, my dad loves Turner and Hooch, and but he also directed Tomorrow Never Dies, the James Bond film with Pierce Brosnan from 1997. And that one may be arguably, also one of his most successful films that he's ever done. Um, but, from a fan perspective, I think that, it's interesting to see, a director that's known for more, conventional action, thriller, films like that and tackle such a kind of quirky and comedic premise. It shows a willingness, I think, from the director to experiment, much like Stallone himself did with this role. Um, and just the director here, Spottiswoode, he keeps the pace moving and allows that central kind of comedic relationship to drive the film, even if the script itself is kind of highly reliant on that, on the core gag here. Um, but let's be upfront. I mean, Stop or My Mama Shoot did not achieve any kind of critical acclaim, or massive box office success, upon when it was released. Um, in fact, it's kind of often cited, even by Stallone himself, and I think I mentioned this in one of my other videos. But, it's a film that he wishes that he had not even made. He feels like it really kind of like made his career bomb. Um, and there's that whole story, that he reportedly took this role to prevent his rival Arnold Schwarzenegger from getting it. Because Arnold, apparently told Stallone about the film as a joke because he was trying to trick Stallone into taking the role. Well, if that story is true, that's kind of genius, honestly, by Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm not gonna lie. But this film, is frequently listed, among a lot of the worst movies ever. Um, but I don't think that's for to me. I don't believe that. Like I've seen a lot worse movies than this. I've seen a lot of shit, and I think this is far from one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But I just think that this movie really represents Stallone kind of taking a big risk, at kind of building his career with these kind of iconic tough guy roles like Rocky Balboa and John Rambo. He's really stepping into this kind of broad, almost slapstick comedy scene where he's constantly being outdone by his mother, this character that playing his mother. Was I just think that was a really bold move from him, and over the years, this movie has kind of had a small cult following, I think, just particularly among those who appreciate that kind of sheer absurdity that's involved in the film or enjoy those kind of so bad it's good type of movies. Um, I just think that it's become this kind of cult film because of those type of people that that love that kind of stuff. So for many fans, it falls into the kind of like what you call a guilty pleasure, or so cheesy it's charming. That type of category. Um, and just because the outrageous premise here from the film is, and the committed performances, despite the silly script and everything, it makes it strangely rewatchable. Um, and this is definitely a movie that I would watch again in as an adult. Like I said, I watched this movie a lot when I was a kid, and I loved this movie when I was a kid. Now I don't like it as much now as an adult that I did when I was a kid, but still, there's just something special about it that makes it so appealing. And just whatever its flaws are, just that pairing of Sylvester Stallone and Estelle Getty is unforgettable. They kind of had this really weird on-screen chemistry that just definitely worked somehow. Just that sheer oddity of their partnership is really this film's lasting image. Um, it's a comedic duo that you simply don't see anywhere else, and for fans, that kind of unique dynamic is often enough to just make the film worth watching sometimes. And the character of Joe's mom, armed with her submachine gun, and all her motherly advice has just really become strangely iconic in a way when it comes to these like buddy cop movies. Um, but I guess in conclusion, while Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, it didn't rewrite the rules of comedy or win any awards unless it was a Razzie. It might have won a Razzie award, but for a Stallone fan, it's I think this it's okay. It's I'm not going to say it's a great movie. I'm not going to say it's even I'm not going to say it's one of the worst movies in the world or anything, but it's a very bold, you know, and perhaps misguided experiment, that has this really goofy charm to it, and it's just a very interesting part of Stallone's career, and his filmography. So you kind of just you go into this movie knowing what you're getting, which is just pure comedy chaos, spearheaded by Stallone himself. And, sometimes that's just exactly what a fan wants. But um, when it comes down to it, between these two, and I did a fan vote as well, and it was unanimous on this because they were thinking the same thing that I was thinking. When it comes to Twins versus Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, Arnold gets the point. Twins, I think, is a much more superior film than Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. And it seems like the fan vote that I took, everybody else, feels the same way. Um, it's just like, even though that chemistry was there between Estelle Getty and Sylvester Stallone, there's just something odd about it, and something that it didn't live up to par when it came to Twins. But of course, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, plus Ivan Reitman at the helm. It's hard to compete with that. Um, and when I get to the next film I'm going to talk about, um, you know, that argument could be used the same for it because the next film I talk about is going to be Kindergarten Cop, and Ivan Reitman directed that one as well. So yeah, so it comes down to it. Arnold wins this matchup, so that puts the score now at 3-2. Arnold now in the lead. So let's see how the second part of this show fares, and see if Stallone can catch up. So the next movie I'm going to talk about, like I said, is Kindergarten Cop, and this movie came out in 1990, and this may be my favorite comedy of Arnold's. This may be the one that I've watched more than any of the other comedies that he was a part of. And like I said, with Twins, my journey as an Arnold fan started out with the explosions, the muscle, the iconic one-liners, in all these action films, the Terminator, Commando, Predator. Um, all that stuff is like the bread and butter of Arnold's career. So, when you get to that part of Arnold's career, though, where, he's doing a movie about, working with kids as a substitute kindergarten teacher, I mean, that's definitely going to intrigue you, as a fan. Maybe even a little skeptical. But man, let me tell you, Kindergarten Cop delivers in ways that I don't think we even knew that this is something that we would want. I mean, it wasn't just a movie. It was just Arnold showing the world that he wasn't just this ultimate action hero, but just a comedic force with surprising heart. Because Twins wasn't just a one time deal. It wasn't just a fluke that worked. But no, this was a part of Arnold himself. Like he really had that sense of humor to him that really worked and that continued to have him in these successful comedies. And Kindergarten Cop is just a brilliantly executed comedy with this kind of solid action thriller backbone to it as well. So Arnold plays Detective John Kimball, who is as tough as nails, LAPD cop. Kind of sounds familiar, right? Just like the LAPD cop that Stallone played in Stop or Mama Shoot. But John Campbell here, he spent years, tracking down, this drug dealer named Cullen Crisp, who was, played by Richard Tyson, which I ended up seeing Richard Tyson one time at, I think it was Lexington Comic Con. I think he's a Sean Clark client, if I'm not mistaken, but I haven't seen him at a convention since then, and that was years ago. But not to get off topic or anything, but so the break in this case where John Campbell is trying to hunt down Cullen Crisp, uh, it, it it comes when they learn that Crisp is definitely trying to find his estranged ex-wife and son, who hold this crucial piece of evidence, which is a coded message revealing where he committed a murder years ago. So the lead on the ex-wife's location points him to this small town in Oregon, specifically to this local elementary school where the son is enrolled. So John Kimball's partner, Phoebe, who's played by Pamela Reed here, she's supposed to go undercover as the boy's kindergarten teacher to help locate the mother. However, Phoebe gets violently ill with the flu literally minutes before they have to show up at the school. And this is where the magic begins with this film. So, with no other option, Detective John Campbell has to step in and pretend to be this kindergarten teacher. So the film just brilliantly brings this comedy from this kind of ultimate fish out of water scenario with John Kimball accustomed to interrogating these criminals, and busting heads and all that, is suddenly confronted with this classroom full of these hyperactive, these utterly unpredictable 5-year-olds. And just that whole plot unfolds, as John Kimball navigates, just the chaos of teaching, managing nap time, dealing with, uh, the ferret that he brings, his pet ferret to the classroom, and just leading, PE class with the kids, just trying to figure out which of these kids, is Colin Crisp's son. While also kind of romancing this, fellow teacher named Joyce, who turns out to be the very person that he's looking for. Um, so all the while, Chris makes his way to town, forcing Kimball, to protect the school and the children from this very real and present danger. And just it's a perfect blend of that kind of procedural aspect of tracking down the villain, the comedic gold of Arnold in the classroom, just the budding romance, and finally that's the action climax where John Campbell has to use his real skills to save the day. Um, and like I said, before, Ivan Reitman is the director again here with this one, just like he was for Twins. Um, so that style that Reitman has, often involves a kind of somewhat grounded realism within this kind of outrageous, premise, allowing the comedy to feel earned rather than forced. So he really knows how to direct actors known for, like other genres and help them kind of shine in comedy. Um, and for Kindergarten Cop, he took the star, known for like terminating androids and facing aliens and all that, and it put him in this most unlikely and hilarious scenario. Just putting that trust in Arnold and his charisma and just these comedic instincts that which Reitman kind of helped discover within Twins. Um, but Kindergarten Cop, it really holds a very significant legacy. Especially with Arnold Schwarzenegger's career, um, and just that landscape of the early '90s cinema. Because this one came out in 1990, and just it really solidified, or it helped solidify, Arnold's comedic career. Just following that success of Twins, this movie, it was a different kind of comedy though. It proved that Arnold, could carry a movie that leaned heavily on these kind of heartfelt moments and all that really wild humor, rather than just kind of than a physical contrast, to the film. Um, Even though there are parts of that, towards the end of the film, though, of that whole physical contrast, but it just showed that he had this range about him, and just could connect with audiences in a softer way, paving the way for films like Junior. Um, and for fans, it really expanded our appreciation. He wasn't just a force of nature. He could be genuinely funny, and even kind of just um a big-hearted guy that really, really cared, about these kids, and helping this kid and his mom that was in danger. So this movie really became an instant classic, I think, for families, because and that's something that really also began with the movie Twins. Um, and just that's something that people weren't used to, because they were used to Arnold being in these rated R films and these action, these very violent and very like very violent and like gory films. You know what I mean? It's just, but just, so this it was really just kind of a switch that flipped, and so now like Arnold was seen as, a family movie type of guy. It's because it's this kind of blend of light action and these genuine laughs and just these really touching moments in the film that really made it perfect for a repeat viewing. And like I said, that's definitely the case for me, because I think this is, out of all of Arnold's comedies, this is the one that I've watched more than any of them. And it's, there's so many lines in this. It's so quotable. Like, it's not a tumor, and who is your daddy and what does he do? And just all kinds of, and the little kid, like, boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. And and then there's the two twin girls. It's like, our mom says our dad is a real sex machine. It's just so many stupid lines like that in the movie that just makes it so appealing, not only to me, but just to so many people out there, that, especially Arnold fans. I think this is, definitely one that's highlighted a lot in his career. Um, and like I was saying, like the interactions between Arnold and the kids are just there are so many things that are quotable, and memorable, and just it's like this is just a very nostalgic touchstone for many who grew up in the late '80s and the early '90s. Um, and while this wasn't the absolute first of the action star does comedy type thing, Kindergarten Cop alongside Twins, really cemented that idea that a major action star could successfully transition into or incorporate comedy into their kind of repertoire. Um, it it really influenced you know, like casting decisions and opened up possibilities for other stars, later on. And and both Arnold and Stallone were both doing this, and not just Stallone, but like and Arnold, but Kurt Russell was also kind of involved in it too. Like with, on if you watch last night's episode, I talked about Tango and Cash, and Tango and Cash has a lot of comedy in it as well. So Kurt Russell was kind of like, blending into that kind of transition as well. But this just really influenced a ton of other actors like Bruce Willis and and a ton of um, well, I was going to say Burt Reynolds, but no, Burt Reynolds was kind of always like a mix between comedy and action anyway. But yeah, just there's so many, people that kind of transition from action to comedy, just because it just shows that it really works. And and for critics and just the industry, this film was a very powerful demonstration, of Arnold's unexpected acting range. You know he he wasn't like a wooden actor or anything like that. He could react. He could deliver lines, with comedic timing, and he even convey a kind of sense of paternal tenderness. So yeah, I mean it's just very Arnold's very impressive in that range that he has, and that's highlighted, especially within this movie. Because if you think about the scene where he gets overwhelmed by all the kids' needs at once, or like when they're all going kind of crazy, and then he just kind of does, "Shut up," or even like the touching moments where he genuinely kind of connects with them. And even when he like shows concern for the little boy that's getting beat by his dad at home, it's beating both him and his mother. Um, and then you see like later in the film, it's kind of foreshadowing something, and you see when he finally confronts that dad and punches the shit out of him, which was well deserved. So it just really proved to people that Arnold was more than just muscle and catchphrases. So yeah. So, and I think that's another reason why I love this movie so much. And just the premise itself is just so distinct, I think, and memorable that it's been referenced, and parodied, countless times in other media. There's memes all over the place of on the internet, and on social media of Kindergarten Cop. Um, just that image of this muscle bound action hero struggling with these tiny chairs and glitter glue is just everything involved here is just it's instantly recognizable. And I've never met a person who has seen Kindergarten Cop that disliked the film. Everyone I've ever talked to loves this movie if they've seen it. And I've not met a ton of people who haven't seen this movie because this film was a significant box office hit. It further proves that Arnold's star power extended beyond that core action audience and just making him one of Hollywood's most bankable stars across multiple genres. Um, and for me, as an Arnold fan, Kindergarten Cop is just a pivotal moment in Arnold's career. It was very surprising, very brave, and just ultimately very rewarding to see this man who leveled city blocks and went toe to toe with the predator, you know go to navigate these kind of temper tantrums and participate in show and tell and dress like a farmer and sing "Old MacDonald." You know, there's just something so strangely appealing about all that. But he wasn't just playing a character; he was becoming this very unlikely, hilarious and surprisingly lovable figure. I think this movie is a testament to his charisma and his willingness to kind of take those risks. Um, and it was just guided by this director who knew exactly how to harness that unique star power that Arnold had, for this maximum comedic and emotional effect. Um, and it just remains an absolute joy to watch this movie. A perfect blend of everything that makes Arnold great with that unexpected dose of heart, that really seals the deal here. I give this one two thumbs all the way up. Or as perhaps Kimball might, approve. I am the potty pooper. No, wait, no, that's the opposite of this movie. So this movie is the party. So yeah, definitely. If for any reason you're watching this and you've never seen Kindergarten Cop, please take the time to watch this movie. If you just like really heartfelt comedies with just a lot of laugh out loud moments, or if you're just a huge Arnold fan and for some reason you've never seen Kindergarten Cop, what the hell are you waiting for? Go and watch Kindergarten Cop. I love this. I love the movie. So the next movie and the last movie we'll be talking about has a lot to live up to when it's going up against Kindergarten Cop. And this is the complete opposite of what Kindergarten Cop is, because there's no comedy about this next movie at all. And this is Cliffhanger from 1993. So, and as much as I am a fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger, I've been a lifelong fan of Stallone as well. And Cliffhanger, I remember when this movie came out. So I was about 7 years old, I think, when this movie came out, and there was a lot of promotion. I remember for this movie when I was a kid. It was like in all these different comic books that I bought. There was always like advertisements in comic books. They made a Super Nintendo game of Cliffhanger. Um, there was just all kinds of stuff surrounding this movie. And when it dropped in '93, let me tell you, it was exactly what we needed, I think. It wasn't Rocky, fighting in the ring or Rambo, fighting a war or anything like that. But it was Stallone against the elements of Earth, and just against some seriously nasty bad guys as well. All while hanging thousands of feet in the air on these like mountains. Um, so this movie has got a lot of heart, I think, a lot of gut wrenching tension. It's got incredible action to it, and Stallone is just at his very gritty, determined best here from the '90s. It's a prime example, I think, of that early '90s action that's done right. Using these kind of real locations, and practical stunts that make you feel, almost every fall and every punch. And seriously, this one is a must watch, I think, in the Stallone filmography. And one of the things that's always found funny with this is that one of the movies that I covered earlier this year on the channel, Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls. The opening of Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls is a parody of the opening of Cliffhanger. So I mean that shows how much of an appeal that this movie had. And but Cliffhanger, is this high stakes, action thriller that was set primarily in this the beauty of the Rocky Mountains. You know, though I think it was actually filmed in somewhere in Italy, but the story centers on Gabe Walker, who is played by Sylvester Stallone, and just this. One second, let me pause right there. Someone keeps messaging me. I need to see what's going on. Okay. All right. It wasn't anything. Never mind. But anyway, like I was saying, the story, focuses on Gabe Walker, who's played by Sylvester Stallone, and he's this former mountain rescue climber, who's haunted by this tragic accident involving his friend Hal Tucker's, who's played by Michael Rooker. Hal, it's Hal's girlfriend during this rescue attempt gone horribly wrong, where Gabe is trying to save Hal's girlfriend, and she slips and falls down into the mountains, and that is parodied in Ace Ventura with the raccoon, and which I absolutely hate that. I hate that I would rather see them do that with a person than see him drop that raccoon. But but just that opening scene itself, is one I think the most famous and chilling moments in the entire film. It's really this kind of pure gut punching sequence that immediately establishes that the stakes and Gabe's profound trauma throughout the film. Um, so 8 months later, Gabe has basically quit climbing and is trying to move on. He's planning to leave town. However, his plans are interrupted when this plane that's carrying a fortune in stolen U.S. Treasury money crashes high in the mountains. And this ruthless group of these kind of international thieves, led by this intelligent former military guy named Eric Quellen, who's played by John Lithgow. He ends up surviving all this, and needs help retrieving the money that's spread across these various locations, in the mountains. Um, so they trick Hal and Gabe's rescue team into coming to the crash site. Intend to use them as guides to recover, the cash and when the rescuers realize that they've stumbled into a hijacking, they try to escape, leading to this violent confrontation where Gabe is separated from the group and presumed dead by the villains. Um, so the rest of the film is just kind of this pulse pounding, cat and mouse type game where Gabe, uses his kind of unparalleled climbing skills and survival instincts, and he becomes this only person who can stop Quaylen and his crew. So he has to navigate these really deadly cliffs and navigate just the mountains against these armed and desperate criminals, all while trying to save Hal and their fellow rescuer Jesse, who's played by Janine Turner, and who they've been taken hostage. So the mountains here in this movie aren't just a backdrop. They are almost a character in themselves because and this almost like this deadly opponent that both Gabe and the villains have to contend with. You know what I mean? And it's like it's a race against time, and weather and just these highly skilled killers with the altitude and the freezing temperatures and just all these drops from the cliffs really adds this very unbearable tension to every scene. And the director of Cliffhanger here is someone that I'm very familiar with, Rennie Harlan. So um, I'm a huge horror fan, and one of my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street films is Part Four, The Dream Master. Um, and that one was directed by Rennie Harlan. But Rennie Harlan, he was born in Finland, and he became known like in the late 1980s and the 1990s for kind of directing all these big budget, high energy, action films. And there's action in that on Elm Street as well, even though it's mainly horror, but you get what I'm saying. But he just kind of had this knack for staging these large scale set pieces and maintaining a very relentless pace. Um, and just with Nightmare on Elm Street Part Four, which just came out about 5 years before Cliffhanger was released. It was a very early success, that showcased that visual flair and just kind of revitalized the whole Freddy Krueger franchise at the time. If I'm not mistaken, Part Four is really what began Freddy Mania in the '80s. So we kind of have Rennie Harlan to thank for that. But if you've watched that Never Sleep Again documentary about the Nightmare on Elm Street films, when they get to Part Four and they're talking about Rennie Harlan, they talk about he was kind of an asshole and he was really hard to work with, from what I understand. But but it is what it is. He made some really good films. And another really good film that he made was Die Hard 2 from 1990. And this is probably his most famous, directorial effort besides Cliffhanger, probably. Um, Rennie Harlan successfully took over the reins from John McTiernan from the original Die Hard and just really delivered this very thrilling and action packed sequel that expanded that scale, of the original while retaining its kind of core tension, McClane versus terrorists in a like confined, high stakes environment. But he also did Deep Blue Sea, which is one I'm going to be coming up here in about a month or so. I'm going to be doing a whole Shark Week. And Deep Blue Sea is one of the films that I have planned to watch. Um, but while Rennie Harlan had notable box office disappointments later in his career, I think most notably Cutthroat Island. Um, Cliffhanger is, I think, widely regarded as one of his best directed films. It's successfully blended in these intense action sequences and just this beautiful cinematography and a lot of suspense here too. And he just knew how to utilize these kind of spectacular locations and push the limits of practical effects for that kind of maximum impact. And when it comes to the legacy and the impact that this film has made, particularly in Sylvester Stallone's career and just 90s cinema. Stallone, in the early 1990s, he had a couple films that didn't perform as expected. Like Stop or My Mama Shoot. Even though I do like Stop or My Mama Shoot, I mean, it didn't, as far as like success, it didn't pan out that well. But Cliffhanger, following on the heels of the more serious crime drama Copland, even though Cliffhanger came out first, Copland was a critical success. It showed a lot of different range. And that's actually one that I'm going to be that will be the last movie that I'm going to be covering in this series. So if you're a fan of Copland, check out round 5 this week of Schwarzenegger versus Stallone, where I talk about Copland. Um, but they were both massive box office success, and Cliffhanger, grossed over $255 million worldwide against, a production budget of around like $70 million. So it just really proved that that Stallone was still this major, bankable action superstar, capable of carrying this huge production on his back, and it reminded audiences that why they loved watching him, face these impossible odds. And while not the first film that was set in the mountains, Cliffhanger, I think arguably made that popular, in the subgenre of these kind of high altitude action thrillers. It just really it vividly demonstrated how the environment itself could be a source of intense conflict and that visual spectacle, and it made mountain climbing and survival skills kind of central to the whole heroism, providing a unique backdrop for like these classic action movie themes. Um, and just for a Stallone fan, I think Cliffhanger is essential because it shows him doing what he does best. Playing this kind of flawed but ultimately heroic character who faces these like overwhelming, adversity, both physical and emotional, and just fights every ounce of his being. And Gabe Walker felt like a natural evolution. He had that physical prowess of Rambo, but the vulnerability and the relatable struggle that Rocky had. So yeah, that character in this is very interesting. And it's very enjoyable to see. Um, it's a movie that reminds you why Stallone is a legend. You know, just delivering that because nonstop, thrills against one of the most spectacular backdrops imaginable. It's pure action entertainment. With Stallone front and center. And that brings me now to the verdict between Kindergarten Cop versus Cliffhanger. So, did a fan vote on this, like I said, and the vote was unanimous between these two as well. And they also matched how I felt about these two as well. And I have to say, as much as I love both Kindergarten Cop and I love Cliffhanger, I gotta go with Kindergarten Cop because it just hits so differently than any of the other films really that I've talked about tonight. And it's got to be up there as one of my favorite Arnold films of all time. Um, and I can't say that with Cliffhanger as being one of my favorite Stallone films of all time. I like Cliffhanger a lot. I think it's a great movie. Um, but there's just so many others, out there from Stallone's filmography that I enjoy a lot more. Um, but in contrast to that, Kindergarten Cop is definitely up there as one of my favorite Arnold films of all time. So the score now sets at 4-2. Arnold in the lead by 2. So, but we got 2 more rounds to go in this series. Um, could Stallone catch back up? We'll have to wait and see. Tune in next time for Crater Mania's 500 Movies in 2025 series. But yeah, like I said, all jokes aside, this is this has been a lot of fun, guys, and and now it's just I'm starting to kind of like get an idea in my head of even though these two are my two favorite actors of all time, um, and always kind of had this issue to where uh, I don't know who I like better. Well, by doing this, it's really kind of helped me see like who I may be enjoying better, who might be my number one of all time. But things could always change, in the next couple rounds. So, definitely check those out, guys. But I guess that's it for this video, for round 3 of Schwarzenegger versus Stallone. I really enjoyed doing this video, talking about these movies. I hope you guys, enjoyed it as well, and I just appreciate all of you for checking it out. I want to thank everyone who either watched this live, is in the chat, or if you're watching this on replay. Just appreciate you guys more than you know. Please drop me a comment below on what your favorite of these 4 movies are. Who is your favorite between Schwarzenegger and Stallone? And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. And if you're new to the channel, always please hit that subscribe button to catch more videos from me like this one. And click that bell for any kind of future notifications as well. But guys, I will see you tomorrow night with round 4. Well, I'm sorry. Let me back up there. So tomorrow I'm actually going to be taking a break, and I'm going to pick back up with round 4 on Thursday. So my bad. So um, yeah, so I just decided to take a break for tomorrow, which is Wednesday. But on Thursday, I'll pick back up with round 4, and then round 5 will be on Friday. But with all that said, I'm Crater. This is Crater Mania. I love you guys. Have a good night.